Hello, beautiful people, wherever you are listening in the world. You are listening to another episode of The Crystal Cocoon. We are Jesse Dejari, Hannah Neal Perez, and I'm Brandon Lapierre. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that I am personally passionate about due to many experiences I've had. We're going to be talking about the ET and UFO phenomenon and what's going on in the world today in regards to this.
And we're going to relate it to also like spiritualism and energy working.
As well as giving you our personal experiences and many things that I personally have never shared publicly.
Ooh. Exciting.
Brandon unveiled.
Nice.
So,
well, how about we start with you tell us some of your experiences, because you have the clearest memory and recollection going far back of interactions with ETs on some levels.
I guess also, when did all this start for you?
Yeah.
I don't know specifically when it started. I was a child, and so I think the first time was around 8 or something like that I remember. There may have been others, but I remember. I mean, I didn't realize that at first. What I do remember is having kind of an obsession with extraterrestrials, and I didn't know why. I would always draw them. I draw these eyes, like watching. You know. And I remember growing up here in Washington, up on the mountain, where I would go outside my window at night and see the stars move. And sometimes I'd have friends come over, and they would watch them with me, and they would form triangular shapes, start changing colors, zip away from each other and do like zigzag shapes, and then come back together, and then start spinning in a triangle. And I loved it. You know, I was like, in a way, I felt like they were just doing that for me to see, and I had no idea about any of the consciousness connection, of course, but I would often go outside my window and watch them, and it was a freaking enough occurrence that my friends would like wonder if we were going to see them tonight. And then one time, I don't remember what age I was, but it was around the time when Communion and Fire in the Sky, those two movies were out, and my mom rented them. And me looking at horror movies, you know, never scared me as a child. I was like, oh, this isn't real. This is BS, whatever. And then watching these movies scared the living shit out of me. I was...
Me too, actually.
I was frightened.
They messed me up for a long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And why is that, though? Like, Why is it, of all the movies, like, we could watch, this is the one to scare me. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking when I was watching it, this is too real. This is too real. This is too real. Mm-hmm. And it was shortly after that time, because I remember...
And how old were you when you watched those?
I was like 8, 10, something around there.
Because I was about 14, 15, and they had just come out. Well, Fire in the Sky had just come out.
So for people who aren't familiar with those films, because that would be me,
okay.
Could you explain a little bit about what those films entailed, and what was it specifically that really, I guess maybe was that catalyst that made it feel a little too real for you? Like, what was the thing that you were like, oh wow, that's not fake?
Well, Communion was a Whitley Strieber book, and they turned it into a movie. So it got altered a bit by Hollywood, and Whitley Strieber will say that.
Had Christopher Walken in it.
Yeah, Christopher Walken was in it.
Love him.
Yeah, so of course he made it creepy.
Exactly. Like, all right, there's already a creep factor. Right. Nice.
And then
Walken.
And then the ETs themselves, they were the closest thing to aliens, like actual aliens that I've ever seen at that point.
Oh, okay.
And then the way they were acting, and I was
familiar.
it was familiar, and it was scary. It was like, oh, this is what they do. This is too real. Oh, this is what they do.
Well, and for me, it was the owl. Mm-hmm. Like all the ways they hide what they're doing in their contact, because you know they will replace the memories with something that seems innocuous, like a weird dream. Or hearing something.
And see, I have those experiences as well.
Me too.
And I think that's why a lot of why it was extra frightening too.
Right.
You know,
wait a minute.
A lot of things as a child you don't really realize what's going on and why it scares you so bad. You just know that it does. And so I had this dream, and this dream was kind of basically to tell me like that I don't need to be afraid. This is not the way it really is. But it was conveyed in a really odd way that always made me wonder about it. It was like I woke up in the middle of the night and everything was clear, and I remember waking up and the light was coming in through the window, and it was so very clear, and it was so real. And I remember my heart started pounding, and I started thinking, oh my God, I know what this is. They're here again. I know what this is. They're here again. And I started walking out into the hallway, and there was a bunch of grays in my living room.
Oh, wow.
Driving around in go-karts. And I thought to myself, this is just ridiculous. How can this is not real.
This can't be happening.
This is not real. This can't be happening. This is too ridiculous. I can't be scared of this. This is too ridiculous to be scared of. And I remember like there was an odd moment in that when I was seeing them driving around where one came really close to my face and then zoomed away. But came so close like it was standing in front of me, but then it zoomed away like it was driving the go-kart. And I'm like, well, that didn't just happen. Because if it was driving, it obviously wouldn't be able to get that close. I'm like, this is just too ridiculous. And then I didn't think anything else of it. I thought that was weird. I woke up and I just had this odd feeling. I was like, this is really odd. And then some other time later, I was driving home from my girlfriend's house. So I think I just got my license. And there was a porcupine. It was in the middle of the night, and there was this porcupine walking across the road. And the porcupine was huge. Its quills went up past the hood of my car. And I remember thinking, oh man, this porcupine's taking forever to cross the road. And I kind of spaced out a little bit, and I looked, and I'm like, oh, porcupine's gone. And I just drove home. I didn't think about it. And the next morning, I was like, Mom, there was this porcupine that was huge crossing the road last night. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, the quills came up past the hood of my car, and it was like sitting there, like wobbling across the road. It took forever to walk. And she's like, that didn't happen. I'm like, what do you mean it didn't happen? I saw it. It was this porcupine. She's like, I don't know what you saw, but it wasn't a porcupine. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, they don't get that big. I'm like, oh. She pulled out this nature book, and I looked in there, and like, sure enough, they only get like a foot and a half tall or something like that with a quill. They don't
like
get
a
very,
medium dog size.
Yes, they're not even as big as your tire on your car.
No, let alone like coming past the hood.
Right.
So I was like, okay. And then I didn't think anything else of it, but I had some other strange experiences along the way. And I don't think I got the regression until I got back from Iraq. But I remember some experiences in San Diego when I was living there where I would wake up and have 3 little marks on my body. Mm-hmm. And they were in a triangle, like little dots in a triangle. Mm-hmm. And then 2 weeks later, in the same spot, they appeared again. Mm-hmm. When I was in the military, too, I had a couple of one experience in particular. And I don't know how this relates or if it's related, but I started to wonder after if there was some correlation there, where I woke up and all the cupboards in my house were flopping open and closed. And all the faucets turned on in my house. And the more I woke up, the more it stopped. My girlfriend at the time was freaking out. And so was the cats. So there was that experience. And then when I actually got to Iraq, there was there was another time when I was a child too. I saw a shadow being. And I've heard other people talk about shadow beings, usually being in a negative type. And when I was a child, it literally petrified me. Mm-hmm. Literally petrified me. I woke up in the middle of the night, dead asleep. I looked out in the hallway, and there was a shadow, and it stopped, and it looked at me, and it just stared at me. And every hair in my body stood up, mm-hmm. and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then when I mustered up the courage, I went and turned on every light in the house, and it was gone. Well, fast forward to Iraq, and I saw one of those again. As a child, it frightened me. When I saw it again, I was in this locked room with 2 other contractors, and so it was locked from the inside. And I remember waking up, and I rolled over, and there was this shadow, this silhouette standing in the middle of my room, and I wasn't scared at all. I just thought to him telepathically, like, well, who are you? and it responded with, "Well, I'm a junior officer in the Galactic Federation." I'm like, "Whoa, okay, I must be tired." And I started to roll over, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, did that just really happen?" And because I was awake at that point, and I rolled back over and like looked, and it was gone. I was like, "Huh." Of all the things I could have said, you know. So there was that, and then when I got back, I got the regression. And then the regression, the two experiences that I had before that I remember, the one with the car and or the one with the go-karts and the one with the porcupine. When I walked out in the hall, they weren't go-karts, or they weren't go-karts at all. They were just the one standing in front of me, which is why it looked like it came close and then went away, because it really was just standing there the whole time. And there was two other ones on the side of me, and they just touched my shoulders, and I kind of blacked out, and it felt like I floated up.
Yeah.
And the one with the car, I remember coming up and stopping, and there was no porcupine there. It was like my headlights reflecting off this little being standing in front of my car. It was had some wrinkly skin, had these large eyes, but like really large pupils. And it just stood there and looked at me, and I just stood there, like I said, in my car. I sat there in my car, and I walked around the car, and opened up the door. I don't know if I was like in shock or something, but I just sat there and opened up the door, and it touched me, and I blacked out again. But it was a different kind. So those were the main experiences I had, and I had a bunch after that where I would feel them come into the room. Or one time during a ceremony, I saw them appear in front of me. So I saw like them pop through another dimension and converse with me about some things. So yeah, I've had a lot of those type of experiences or conscious connections since then, but those were the main physical experiences I've had.
So you had asked about the movies. So to answer that, the Contact was essentially really the first introduction, I think, into mainstream culture, the idea of Greys visiting. And it was bringing about all of these, it was introducing the whole phenomenon that up until that point people had dismissed as being, crazy, of, people being visited, being abducted, of, all these contacts, and how there's a whole community of people that have that. And as always in our culture, it was introduced in a fear-based approach because, we're really afraid of anything we can't understand.
Surprise.
And which actually reminds me of I was doing a lot of watching of different research stuff to prepare for the show, and I heard about something that I'd never even heard of before. In 1942, there was what they call the Battle of L.A., of Los Angeles, where all of a sudden there was this craft that appeared over L.A. It was huge. And our response was to bomb the crap out of it. And so we launched
first and ask questions later.
Anti-aircraft artillery on it for, I forget how long they said, for a while. They sent everything that they could at it. There's images that were on the front page of the LA Times the next morning with, you can see the explosions and the lights from the ship and the searchlights that were shining on it. And they call it the Battle of LA because they felt they were being invaded and they were going to fight them off. Well, eventually it just started to go back off and then disappeared beyond the range of what their spotlights could reach.
What year was that?
1942.
Interesting. So that's like right in the middle of World War II.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information out there that we'll post more on our various resources for you guys to look at, of all sorts of contact happening during that time. There's contact with Hitler. There was all sorts of indications of government contact with aliens. So then Fire in the Sky, after that in 1942, there was a really big effort to discredit all of this information and to discredit those that talked about it. So there's a lot of scientists from the 50s through the 70s who would just go missing once they started disclosing.
What a surprise. Wait,
Right.
That doesn't still happen, does it?
Oh, no. So Fire in the Sky was where contact, was kind of from this approach that Whitley Strieber took of his own personal experiences. Fire in the Sky was a movie that was based on a real-life account of a logger who went missing in the forest. He was working with his brother-in-law and some other people, and some bright light came, and then he was gone. And he was gone for a long time. And he came back after, I can't remember if it was 6 months or 9 months. He called his wife naked and traumatized from a payphone outside of town. And they tried everything to discredit him. They questioned him. They were sure, it eventually in the papers became it was a hoax or, all these different things.
Sure.
But with him, the experiences of being on the ship, I remember there was one scene where, the syrup, he has a flashback, a PTSD moment while he's at home after he's been returned. And the syrup bottle turns over on the table, and this thick syrup pours down in front of him because he's gotten under the table. And he sees this stream, and it takes him back to laying on a table and having this probe go into his eyes and all of these things. And that, I can't even tell you the visceral response I had when I saw that. Like, it stuck with me for a really long. I mean, here it is 25 years later, and I'm like, seriously, it makes my skin crawl even thinking about it. But for myself, my own personal experiences with aliens, when I was a child, I grew up with this concept. Like, I grew up with the idea that they were real. We grew up being visited. But I just thought my mom was crazy. She told a lot of crazy stories, I mean, I love you, Mom. I don't think you're really crazy. But, she had a lot of stories. And we had ghosts and all of these things. But when I was born, there was a lot of complications. I was really underdeveloped, and the placental attachment was really bad. So I was a 21-inch long baby, and I think I was under 5 pounds in weight, and I was so thin that my skin was translucent. You could see my heart beating in my chest.
Kind of looked like an alien, right?
Yeah. I did, actually. And the doctor was like, just feed her. Just feed her. So my mom had a lot of problems as a result of having me. She had a C-section, and she'd had a lot of problems with my brother as well. He was way too big. And the doctors had told her, your uterus is like an 11-year-old's. You should not be having children in the first place. And they were shocked that she was even really ever able to carry either one of us. So there was all these, like, we shouldn't have even really been born kind of things. And so she stayed in the hospital with hemorrhaging problems for 2 weeks afterward. And I went home with my grandmother. Well, when my mom was coming home from the hospital, she took a taxi cab. And the cab driver, he, as soon as she got in, he took off. And she was like, oh, and she starts to say her address. And he says, don't worry about it, Mikey, I know where you live. Well, that freaked her out because her name is Michael. And, she was just like, what? That really scared her. And he turned around, and she said he had this golden skin and these big golden eyes. And he had like a baseball cap on that was pulled down kind of low. And he just started telling her, it's all going to be okay. You're going to be okay. It's going to be all right. And she said she started to feel really calm. And when she pulled up to the house, it was, my aunt was sitting on the front porch, and she looked at the cab driver, and she looked at my mom, and her mouth dropped. And he said, okay, here you are, Mikey. Just remember, it's all going to be okay. And my aunt and my mom never spoke of it again. Well, then when I was 2, my brother was almost 4. And these are the 2 stories I grew up with, right? So she had a dream, and she had this dream that she woke up and there was a man in her bedroom, and he was the golden-skinned and golden-eyed man, and he looked just like a person otherwise. And he said, it's time to go. It's time to go. We got to go. And she was like, well, I got to get the kids. And he goes, no, you get ready. I'll go get the kids. And she said she got dressed, and he came back, and he was carrying me, and he had my brother by the hand, and my brother had his little puppy dog, dragging behind him. And then he said, beam me up, Scotty. So this was like in the 70s, right? So there's always these insertions in the dreams that kind of make it more,
humorous.
Exactly. Well, that ease it. Yeah. Ease the tension of it. And so he kind of laughed, and she really laughed. Star Trek had just come out at that time. And so she said the next thing she knew, she was on this ship. and that this woman came up and took me from his arms and my brother's hand, and he said, "Don't worry, they know them. It's okay." And my brother and I were totally fine going off, and she took my brother and I off somewhere. And my mom, he began talking to her as the ship traveled, and he took her back to his home world, and he was basically telling her about how they destroyed their planet and how, they ruined their population, and now they're kind of homeless and they live in the stars, and that they don't want this happening anymore. They're trying to figure out how to stop this from happening as cultures evolve. How do we stop civilization from destroying itself? And so it was this whole story. And anyway, my mom woke up the next morning and my brother comes running in and he's got this picture and he says, Mommy, wasn't that the best dream we had? And it's a picture of a drawing he's made of this planet with these multiple moons and suns. And it's what she saw, So we grew up with those stories. And we would see lights in the sky and we would see things moving. And I never questioned that they were aliens. That, to me, it seemed ridiculous, but I didn't think I was being contacted. I just thought that was a funny story. Mm-hmm. But when I was, the first time I met Brandon, actually, at that potluck at the Psychic Gallery, he was talking with another woman about talking consciously, having consciousness connections with aliens and his experiences, and she was too. And I'm like, oh my God, I never talk about that. Whoa, I so need to talk to that guy. And that was what actually first attracted me to you, was because that you had those experiences. And I don't talk about them very much because you sound crazy.
You do. That's why I don't generally talk about it. I'm like, okay, who's the crowd?
Right. Let me gauge my audience.
I'm like, well, yeah, okay, this person needs to know.
Yeah, but seeing fire in the sky, that traumatized me. I would have to say that even more than contact, that traumatized me. My mom and I slept together. I was 15. I slept with my mother for months after that.
Well, that's the thing, though. Like when you remember the contact experiences themselves, they were never scary.
No.
And then the majority of experiencers will tell stories and about their experiences, and it's almost never frightening.
Right.
They always tell a story of feeling incredible amounts of love and friendship and peace and respect for them. Mm-hmm. But there are the other experiences too. So where do those come from?
Well, and there's a lot of, you can find a lot of different people that are now starting to come out and speak out about their government involvement with aliens.
Exactly.
So these are people who who could live openly with their cohorts, at least their coworkers, with the reality that aliens are real. They're having negotiations with them. They're having contracts with them. They're learning from them. And no, they're not going to be all good. But at the same time, there's one person who I was listening to describe it. We operate in a fear-based approach to things. So we assume they're going to be responding the same way. And there was a man, Corey Goad, who was interviewed, and you can look him up. His interview is really exploding on the internet right now. And he talks about how there was some big battle that happened in space, because he says humanity's already out in space. We're already out interacting amongst these aliens. We already have there's the global conglomerate of corporations, the ICC, who has ships and bases and all that out there already. And that there's defectors that have come from those, and they organized themselves and attacked a base on Mars. This is a story he's telling about. And I forget how many he said, I want to say 250,000 people, 250,000 people were killed as a result of this attack. And so there was this big summit meeting that he describes happening, and the humans who were there they were like upset. It's humans who were murdered. Like what's your response going to be? And they were assuming it would be a military-like response. And the response of the summit was, we need to teach people to love each other more. We need to raise our vibration. This kind of stuff is unacceptable. And the humans were like, "What? You're not going to go bomb those people? They're going to get arrested. There's not going to be any capital punishment here.
You're not going to do to them that we do to every other living organism on our planet."
Right. And there was
How well has that worked
disbelieve.
for us?
Exactly. Because they're not operating in the same way that we are. Now, are they
No.
going to assume that we're going to be terrified just by the presence of them? Well, now they know we are, but should we be? No,
Well, my preparation for this show was to watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
No,
Because why? It's a rad movie.
that's a touchy feeling.
Right, it's a good movie. Right, because that came out in 1977, I believe. So, and it was really, it came out right around the time of Star Wars. So there was a Spielberg-Lucas bet on the films, which film would do better. Lucas bet again himself, and interestingly
And
enough,
are always like betting which is bigger.
competition.
So, because that.
A lot of my personal experience is non-existent when it comes to aliens. It's not necessarily that I haven't had experiences. There's so much of my childhood I don't remember. That it's just they're blanks of time. So I don't. There are a lot of things I've remembered in the last couple of years about my childhood. So the closest thing that I have as far as experiences are concerned are the people around me. I've always had people in my life who had a very tangible feeling about aliens and ETs. And that started from the time I was in high school. I had a really close friend. And actually he and I met on the internet, and he lived in California and I lived in Washington, and he was obsessed about aliens. And I was like, well, that's just his thing. And he would talk about the Essassani, who I didn't realize now I have a correlation to that name. At that time I didn't. Bashar, who I can never remember his name. Daryl
Anka.
Anka, yeah. He channels from that same sort of alien line, which I love his channelings. I think they're awesome.
Bashar's my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really I love the way his style of how he does it, and a lot of what he says. And it really resonates for me. But my most recent alien experience actually happened with both of you. What a surprise. They were actually working on my energy. I had fallen and hurt my ankle and broke a couple of toes and was feeling pretty physiologically and physically kind of messed up, out of alignment.
You were totally messed up.
Yeah, it was
That foot was funky.
Yeah, it was messed up. But they did energy work, and believe me, it is healed. Wow. It's like, wow. It was wow. But part of that work, you guys would come over to my house and we were working on that leg, and we were just doing some just energy work. And all of a sudden, there was an energy that was very present with all of us. And Jess, you were the one that said it first. You were like, there's something here. And I had already felt like I was off in space. Like I was just, receiving all of this energy, and I was kind of off floating around in space, and all I saw was a doorway. And when I looked at the doorway at first, it scared me. There was so much fear about even looking at that doorway, looking at it, seeing, I could see it was partially open. I could see there was light coming through the doorway, and I was so scared. And I thought, what am I so scared of? It's a door. Like, why am I so scared? And that energy was there, and they were like, you don't have to be scared. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I won't be scared. And I energetically opened the door and I walked through, and I had this, literally got almost catapulted out into space and was on this time journey through space and distance, and ended up on this planet, and it felt like home. It felt like no home I've ever experienced on this earth, and I just started crying. And I was like, home, it feels like home. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. I've never felt that feeling of a connection to a place that wasn't actually tangibly my house, my bedroom, my bed, my city, my town, my community. This was someplace
through a door.
Right, through a doorway. This was someplace I had, quote, never been before, but clearly had been before. So for me, it's not that I never had or I had a belief that aliens didn't exist. I firmly believed that it was completely egocentric to believe that we as humans were the only living organisms in the universe. Even my child brain was like, really, my brain explodes when we talk about the vastness of the universe, and you're telling me that we're the only life forms? I'm 7 years old and that sounds like
Ridiculous.
Yeah, that sounds stupid.
Okay.
Yeah, it just sounds dumb. Considering we're still finding life on this planet.
Right.
Yep, billions of planets in the galaxy,
Right.
which has billions of galaxies in the universe,
Right.
and we still don't know the number.
Right. It goes on
It
and
just-
on and on.
Yeah.
And to think of our little galaxy that we have, our solar system and how it works and all the life that we still find in the deep oceans on this planet and the deep jungles on this planet, and the people who some of them have never met any kind of quote civilized life before
Right.
on this planet.
Yeah, there's an island like I was just reading about in the Indian Ocean that has never anyone who even tries to approach, they just start throwing spears and arrows at and kill them.
Good for them.
There was even a shipwreck where a husband and wife were stranded on a reef just right outside of the island, and they killed them. Like,
Oh, wow.
anyone who gets anywhere near
Just-
there, they have
Nope.
yeah.
Zero tolerance.
When you think
Zero
about it, it makes
tolerance.
sense from their cultural perspective.
For sure.
because
Yeah.
You don't know what these foreigners are bringing.
Heck
many,
no.
many of them brought smallpox and disease and
yeah.
things that wiped them out, or
Animals,
or
insects,
industry.
culture.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, in breaking the Aboriginal and ancient ties to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
philosophies, and so much of that we talk about how we have destroyed our own planet. and,
Right, exactly.
And we are still in the throes of destroying our own planet for money.
Right.
Not, I mean,
Right.
not for any higher purpose other than money. Somebody's making $1 on this destruction.
From some imaginary thing that says you're entitled to have more.
Right.
It's not even backed by gold anymore. It just
Right.
really is an imaginary figure.
It really is, yeah.
Right.
And concept of power and stability. When you're looking at the dollar, what you're looking at is how capable is that government of being there to honor the dollar.
Well, it's numbers on a
And-
page.
Exactly.
I could write a bunch of numbers on a page right now and give it to both of you, and it would be worth just about the same.
Exactly.
I mean,
When I think about stuff like how we are as a society and humanity as a whole around the world, I often think about and everybody's like, well, how else are we going to do it? There's no other ways to do it. I always think about, well, what are all these civilizations around the universe doing? What are they doing? Because, they probably don't have a system set up where they're draining their world of all its resources and driving themselves into the ground. They wouldn't still be around after all this time if that was truly happening. So
Yeah.
what is it that they're doing differently than us?
I think what I've been hearing, out of South Africa is the Ubuntu movement, and
Ubuntu, yeah.
and it's a cultural movement. There's Michael Tellinger, who I mentioned earlier. He is also he's not a scientist, but he's a researcher who lives down there, and he's running for president on the Ubuntu ticket. And it's basically, I'm probably saying it wrong, but it's basically the concept that we all do a certain number of hours of work to contribute to the functioning of our society. So whether that's working in the farm or working in the factory or researching or developing, that's the basic functioning, so that there's food, there's transport. And then the rest of your time, then all of your needs are provided, and the rest of your time is spent pursuing what's your dream. What do you do? What's your passion? And how do you contribute that to your culture? So if you're passionate about broadcasting, well, then you're contributing stories to your culture. If you're passionate about research, then you're developing technology for your culture. And they're doing it on a small scale, of course, because that's what humanity can tolerate right now. But I would love to see that grow bigger and bigger. The more I learn about it,
I think it
it's amazing.
is. And there are so many.
Right? That's how I operate.
We talk about, buzzwords that are coming out lately, sustainable living, and we
Bartering.
right, and energy exchange. And communities who are looking to have that same kind of philosophy, as there are others on our planet who would call that commie socialism.
Right.
It is-
Blacklist you.
right. It's a level of community. You put in and you get back.
Right.
You don't get the same energies back that you put in, but we're all, putting in what we can and following our hearts
Right.
and helping to support each other in a loving, encouraging environment
Right.
that sustainably not just supports humans, but supports animals, supports the earth, is not taking away it from any resources or is putting those resources back.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with my roommate last night about the need for humanity to think more long term.
Yes.
Right now, we're so like centrally focused. We're so like me focused, and like
How much is the dollar?
what can I give my child or my immediate family, or like how much can I get in my life? But it's not like long term focus. If we all like start to shift humanity towards more the long term goal, like how can we shift more towards the utopian society that everybody dreams of, or many people dream of? How can we shift more towards this idea that we can work together as a planet? And that's what, you know, a lot of these contact experiences they're trying
Right.
to get across is like, this is the way you change your society.
Yeah.
You change your society from within by beginning to drop these ideas into people to raise their consciousness to a certain level.
Right.
It's kind of like we're so even our ideas about uniting people. I think in a way it's almost divided within that,
Right.
Because you have people say, "Well, I'm a feminist.
Yeah.
I'm a this. I'm a that," and animal rights, and I mean these are all good concepts. But I was talking to somebody else about me, and I'm like, no, I'm not a feminist. To me, when I hear the word feminist, I remember like seeing like angry lesbians who were man haters, and they said all men are dogs and yada yada yada. So they were like anti-man, pro-woman. I'm like, well, that's not equality. So you know, I view myself as an equalist, and we really got to. If we're going to be any kind of ist, it should include all things. It should include all life, a respect for life itself. And we really got to start thinking this direction, because at some point in our development, if we get that far, we're going to become galactic citizens. And then we're going to have to be all over again. Well, now we have to start thinking about these other civilizations. It's like, oh, pro-human, oh, these invaders, oh, da-da-da-da. And we really start thinking about like how we fit into the bigger picture. Because
Yeah.
we're not alone in the universe.
Well, I have to say, I just have to say, because I am a woman, I have a vagina. If you have a vagina or you like them, then you should be a feminist, I think, personally, because
I just don't like the word.
the word has lost all of its meaning. It's become
Totally.
taken over by the vocal minority. And that's true of so many movements. And that's why we can't do a movement about a thing like that. We can't. What we have to do is it has to be a movement about acceptance and tolerance of all people, whether you're a female or not.
Well, that's what I just meant by
Exactly.
equalist.
I know that's what you mean, but I just had to address the feminist word, because there's this part of me that's like, ugh, and then I remember what comes to mind, because as we have these discussions, this is what happens. Our personal words get triggered inside of us. They trigger something, and then we start blocking information or blocking conversation. There's a quote by the Dalai Lama where he says, once you start to define yourself as a thing, you're separating yourself from everyone else.
Exactly.
And that's really, I think, the crux of it, is we need to stop defining ourselves as anything other than human beings. And we want other human beings to be respected and loved and cared for, because that's the way that we can grow and evolve ourselves, you know, and become the higher vibrational people that we're talking about.
Well, what I hear you guys really talking about is empathy.
Exactly.
The ability to not only have this certainty about who you are, but also be able to, okay, well, I'm not Jessie. I don't have the same, you know, but I am a woman and I do have a vagina. And I
you
would
like it.
I would consider myself a feminist, but I can completely understand that's
Right.
not a word I would like tout from the rooftops, or I frankly
not
would
on
even
the
put on my
byline.
Facebook, because I
Right.
know the level of negative connotation that is associated with that word. And yeah, I get it, because when we talk about, you know, socialism, we talk about politics, we talk about all of these things that define who we are, but those definitions also create division. And empathy is what says it's okay that there's differences, because I still love you.
Right.
You still matter, you still have worth, and you still belong.
Right.
You're all of those things to me. So it's cool that that's how you are understanding yourself, as the expression of who you are, but that's not the end part of how I see you. You're so much more than that.
Well, and there's so much programmed into the word, right? And it's the same is true with aliens or ETs or UFOs
Totally.
or USOs or any of these concepts.
And there's so much that's trying to be programmed into that
Exactly.
concept.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's where we need to go next with this, is like talking about like what's really going on with those negative experiences.
Right.
A lot of it is programmed.
Yeah.
What people don't know is a lot of these UFO movies that show death and destruction and alien invasions are actually funded by the government.
Right. Well, in order to be able to use the government machines and equipment, there's an official spokesperson who is a military officer who gets to determine what level of government involvement. So do you want to use our tanks? Okay, we get to look at your script first. We get to go through and decide how much of this is going to get into your movie. Those are all heavily controlled. So every time you see a tank or a plane or anything, you already can assume the government has been involved. And by government, I'm talking about the government we don't really talk about, the shadow government.
Wait, there's another government besides the government that we think we know?
It's so shadowy.
Well, you guys are just full of uncovering deep and dark secrets today.
One of the things that I came upon in my research, which I thought was really interesting, I used to live in New Mexico, and my stepfather worked in at the base there in Albuquerque, and they were talking about how one of the in the was it the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, some of the most documented interactions between aliens and our government was happening in a place called Dulce, New Mexico, at the how do you say it, the Jicaria Apache Reservation.
All right.
I can't remember how to pronounce it.
I don't remember how to say that.
I'm a white lady, but it was fascinating. They were talking about how the native culture, the indigenous people that live there on that reservation, and the Apaches, of course, are a conglomerate of multiple tribes that really kind of all identify with a similar language and cultural basis. And they're, in that kind of New Mexico, Utah, Colorado area, and their culture is laced with alien interactions. They have no doubt that they're sky people, and they call them sky people.
Right.
You
talk to the elders,
right.
know, and they don't necessarily share that openly with everybody.
No.
But if you talk to them, they'll tell you, like, they have a long history going way, way back to interactions with star people. They're well aware of it.
Yeah, and there's some of the earliest drawings that we find from 12,000 BC of what clearly looks like aliens, rocket ships, astronauts, people in suits.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have, if we believe what we're told is the record of humanity, that for the last, 20,000 years, humans, 25,000 years have been modern human, then they certainly didn't have like astronauts then.
No.
So what's true here?
Well, it's kind of like if you talk to the elders, they're like, I don't know what the historians were talking about when they went and examined that and determined it was something.
Right.
Because you talk to them and they're like, oh no, absolutely, that was star people.
Right.
You look to the ancient Mayan hieroglyphs, pictographs or whatever, and you'll see what looks like the inside of a ship or some sort of control panel.
Yeah.
And the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and then there's the writings on the cave walls that definitely look
in
alien.
India. My husband's from India, so we get a lot of exposure to Indian culture. He gets blown away when he hears Western people say that humanity's 25,000 years old or 26,000 years old, because their record goes back 250,000 years at least. They consider that to be when this current cycle started. And that there were other cycles before it. And, in India, there's forts that in northern India where there's there's great tales like the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita. And these are stories. If we want to replace gods with aliens, in the Bible even, in any of these religious texts, suddenly they make sense.
It does.
You mean aliens came down in a floating chariot and blasted the crap out of my city with some weapon that melted the sandstone instantly? Oh, yeah, that does make sense. But when we say gods...
That city that has radiation still present in the city that looked like it was hit from an A-bomb, but it was an ancient city.
Right.
People were charred holding hands.
Exactly.
Well, I guess that kind of makes sense if it was some sort of other civilization.
Right. And they have, in two different parts of India, in northern India and in southern India, they have these pillars that are made of metals that we can't even identify. We can't cut. it doesn't rust. We can carbon date the material around it, and we know it's been there for thousands and thousands of years. But it's older than the material that's there. So where did those come from if we can't even identify them here?
Well, there's so many ancient civilizations. So I mean, I have a Mayan background. My grandmother was an indigenous Indian from Guatemala, which was directly linked to the Mayans. So we have all of these, like there's the Hopi Indians who talk about the Hopi prophecies.
Kachina dolls. And,
the Kachina. That's what I was going to talk about next. But go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that we have so many of these ancient and indigenous peoples that have been living on this land a very long time. And it's interesting to me that when there was this spread of civilization, so many of them were wiped out. And their histories were scattered, their people were scattered. The Mayans, there's still discrepancies about what happened to them. Those kinds of things. And there's still a lot of old stories, fear-based stories about what happened to them. So I think it's just interesting that when we start really accepting the fact that there were people here long before any of us were here, and that they have had contact with other worlds, the Sky Fathers, those kinds of things, and that they were a very real part of how they were adapting to this life on this planet. And it's only been since we've created a lot of beliefs, a lot of truths about who we are as humans, what we're capable of as humans, what we do as humans. We start labeling ourselves. Well, I work this job. I am a, director. I'm a CEO.
I am a housewife.
Right. This is what I do. And what I do is who I am. And that has gotten away from a lot of authentic living that allows for possibilities. Opportunities. People are so closed to say that, no, that's just not possible. It's just not possible.
Yep.
When really there's such overwhelming evidence to say it's not only possible, it's true.
Right. And one of the things that I found fascinating, and I just heard in the research I was doing last night by Corey Goad, he was talking about, why is it that suddenly we're having all this alien activity? Why are we suddenly having more visitations? Apparently down in Los Angeles, they get thousands of reports a year of UFO contacts and really it's USO submersibles that they think are coming from the ocean right off the coast there. And one of the things that he talks about is that our planet, our solar system, is shifting into a part of the galaxy that is resonating at a different density than where we resonate at. And that what the main message those beings are trying to share and spread with him is that we have to raise our vibration so that we can exist on that higher density comfortably. And that's really what's happening. We're shifting into this different density.
On a side note, well, not really a side note, but in addition to that, that's a concept you can find with the Mayans about the cycles.
Right, and
about
in 2012.
In 2012, and our galactic position. That's a concept you can find in the work of Nassim Haram, where he talks about our solar orbit, our galactic orbit in the universe.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of modern concepts coming out that
support
all of that information.
Right. And that's really the push of all this energy work. That's the push of people waking up to their consciousness. That's the push of, some people are developing these gifts and they don't even understand why. I was reading on, through Facebook the other night, and all these people are talking about how they're having these clogged sinuses and congestion and more coughing and, what's going on? And then someone else, I have the same thing. And one woman said, she was like, well, I think we're detoxing as we're adjusting to these new vibrational frequencies. And it was in my head like, bing, duh. Oh my God, that's why I've been congested for the last 3 months. I've been detoxing on so many levels. As we get these pings of that makes sense. Follow them.
You've been detoxing on a lot of different levels.
Yes.
Let's not talk about my toxicity. Jeez.
Hey, we talked about my messed up foot.
Yeah. Yes, but you didn't have to have a hole cut out of you.
No, but my leg was a nice color of aubergine
This is true.
probably about 4 weeks.
And you were quite gimpy.
Yes, limpy gimpy.
Way gimpier than I was.
This is true.
At least it didn't last long.
Right. Yeah. Basically, I had since it's been brought up, but I basically had some really toxic stuff come out of me in the form of an abscess that was an abscess of dead tissue that had to be cut out. It was really awful and a terrifying experience. And it happened right after some really significant, deep trauma healing. And it appeared in the part of the body where that trauma occurred. So, yeah, you want to know if energy work works? Well, I have no doubt.
Right. Well, then
It also grew back rather fast thanks to the energy work.
Oh, yes, thanks to, it filled in really quickly. Thank you, Brandon. and to some other people who were very helpful. And and Hannah, I had so much support. It was amazing. And the hole was filled like within a few days, actually. And it was a big hole. Shh, Brandon, don't say it.
Moving on.
exactly. Back to those aliens.
Oh, so the aliens that we were talking about. One of the other things, Brandon's looking something up, and I'm going to give him a minute to do that while he does. That I know I'm mentioning this Corey Goad guy a lot, and I hope you all listen to him because his interview. Well, I listened to that. The first 2 parts are free, and they're out there on the internet. And
I think that was on like Gaiam TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a new broadcasting channel. But one of the things he talks about is one of the beings that he communicates with is a part of his name is a Ra. And so one of the humans in that meeting where the humans were meeting with these alien beings or these other beings the question was, are you guys related to the Ra of Egypt? And his response was, I am Ra Tir Air. His name was Ra Tir Air. So he said, I am Ra Tir Air, was his only answer to the question. And the interviewer said, oh, that's interesting. In the law of one, you say, I am Ra. And so the interviewer was like, wow, that's a great answer. But the man who was being interviewed said, yeah, well, the humans felt it was a pretty unsatisfactory answer. And it was like, we need to shift our perspective with how we're receiving the information, because that's a clear answer right there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think people like to have a whole lot of certainty.
They do.
And humans come with a lot of
Spell it out for me.
Yeah, a lot of expectations that when clarity comes in, it's going to be every T crossed, every I dotted. No, there's a certain level of correlation that you as a human have to make.
Right.
There's a certain level of awareness that you as a human have to be open to. And then you can make those correlations. They do actually fall into place. And every T is crossed and every I is dotted. And you have these aha moments where you go, oh, that's totally it. Mm-hmm. There's a level of certainty. That doesn't tend to happen collectively. I wish it did,
no.
But it doesn't. And so we get a lot of people who are like, that was not really sufficient. Or as we like to hear a lot, that's just mental masturbation. Yeah. It's a lot of words put together that just sort of blah, blah, blah and kind of string things together.
Because we can't say, I don't understand that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or that's just not hitting my awareness yet.
Yeah.
You know,
sometimes people don't like to admit they don't understand. I'd rather just call it mental masturbation.
Yeah, right. It's very true.
It is true. You found it, Brandon?
I think so. There's some other things I wanted to get at, but I can't find exactly what it was. But I wanted to touch on that Cochina thing because I was reading this book by Stephen Greer called Countdown to Transformation. And he actually mentions one of his encounter experiences was of a Cochina. With a Cochina. Cochina. Yeah, so exactly what it was represented by those little dolls, and you had actually wondered if they were actually some sort of ET. I think you mentioned before.
We had that discussion before I started reading the book.
We were like, Cochinas, they've got to be. Like there's like a blue star Cochina and a white star Cochina. Right.
And I remember growing up in New Mexico, they were everywhere.
Yeah, and so he specifically talks about encountering a being that was one of those. And something that's interesting about how Greer views the negative ET experiences is what he says is we've had a lot of this technology going way back to the Roswell event. You know, around that time, we've had the capability of creating biological entities.
Right. And
so a lot of these abduction experiences, they didn't start getting really negative until shortly after that time period.
When humans started getting the technology.
Exactly. And so they started manufacturing these abduction experiences. And when you
Right.
think about like what happened at the Battle of LA, here it as military might giving its all to try and fire at this ship, and it just sits there. It didn't fire back.
No.
They didn't return fire.
No, it
just
didn't
sits there like,
aggressively respond to aggression.
and then it disappeared. And that was it.
Yep.
If it responded in a human way, LA would have been destroyed, and
Yeah.
that would have been it.
Yeah.
But they're not human.
Right.
They've evolved to a level of consciousness, and that's one of the points that he gets across. Is like pretty much what he's discovered, and from his point of view, is that if there's an ET negative experience, it's a manufactured abduction.
Right.
And they do that on purpose, and it relates to Project Bluebeam, where there's supposedly a fake alien invasion coming, so that we have a reason for the public to divide against our galactic citizenship, to start a war against the so-called invaders. And you actually can go back to, who was it, Reagan that says that?
Yeah, it was during Reagan's administration that we started publicly having the Star Wars.
Right, the Star Wars.
The Defense, I forget the name of the Defense Act. That it
and
was.
and they said that was actually to fire at some of these ships.
Right.
That's the whole purpose of the program. They said it was to fire off missiles, but that's not really what it was
Right.
about. And then that I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, there's also there's a story coming out from his name was Sergeant Jim Peniston, and he and another sergeant were patrolling in a forest, and this was in the 50s, I think 50s, 60s, and they came upon a ship. And he saw all these glyphs on the ship, and it was, this seamless ship. And he recalls very clearly walking up and seeing it. And he felt the compulsion to run his fingers along the glyphs, and then he saw one that was bigger than the others. And he put his hand on it, and he said he had all this information coming into his brain, of all this stream of information. And it was all in the form of ones and zeros and binary code. And afterward, when it was over, he went back home. He was interviewed, and by the military, his commanders. And when he went back home, he got out a notebook and he just wrote. And he said he wrote 16 pages of this binary code, and then he put it away and he forgot about it because he was sworn to secrecy by the government and blah blah blah. Well, years later, he and this guy reconnected and they started talking. And the other guy who was with him, he has no memory of that. He has no memory. He remembers seeing a bright light, and that's it. And also their watches were off by 45 minutes of each other. So it was like he touched the ship and kind of went into a different time stream than the other guy did. So years later, then they go and he reveals this binary code. And when computer experts analyzed it, they found that it had a very clear message, which was basically questioning, is humanity ready for evolution? And that was what the code was. And then what he revealed at the end of his story when he was telling it was that it wasn't aliens that was bringing the ship. It wasn't aliens that were contacting us. It was a more evolved human. It's humans from the future coming back, checking in, seeing where we're at. So we're not always talking about these beings from somewhere else.
Right.
Because once
Absolutely.
you start to understand the reality and the nature of reality, you see time doesn't exist. And it's about the frequency with which you appear at. And once you know what the frequency is to express at any point in space or time, then you express there. So,
Which is exactly how these ships move through space and
Exactly.
time. This is how they move through interdimensional aspects, and that's how they phase shift in and out.
right.
Is they just shift their vibration from one density to another,
Exactly.
or one reality to another, and not necessarily that those two are the same either. So some of these craft have different kind of technology, and most of them, what he says is like you were talking about earlier, these blue avians existing in
Right.
the 6th and 7th density. What does that mean?
Right.
And something that Greer talks about is the evolution of consciousness itself, moving from our human consciousness in this 3rd density into more of a cosmic awareness, and then a cosmic consciousness, and then celestial awareness and celestial consciousness, and then past that even you've got the God consciousness. So there's these level of evolution in
Vibrational
consciousness
expression.
and vibrational expression that correlates to the density in which they're existing on.
Right.
And these beings that are existing in these higher densities, that's the level of consciousness that they've achieved.
Right.
So if you think about it from that perspective, if they had to achieve this certain level of consciousness where their technology and their consciousness are intertwined and correlating to each other, and that they can create things with their mind by materialization, which we also have a lot of experiments on Earth, here, that prove the mind-matter connection. So this is not far out anymore. This is not just FM anymore.
Right.
Freaking magic for all you.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's science to back that up. So if they have to raise their consciousness to this level to be able to get to these density points in their evolution, then why would they move back to a state where they're trying to destroy everything? They wouldn't. A God consciousness in its nature, the way I think of it, is an awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. It's the appreciation and love for creation itself. If you're existing at a God consciousness, God being all that is, you wouldn't be going to these other civilizations and wiping them out or trying to destroy them in any way out of fear. You would try to kind of guide them, maybe, to best help them evolve as much as possible without interfering. And that's what I see a lot of them doing. But thinking about the nature of like how that whole thing works, you do probably got some of the lower level evolutionary beings that are out there.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing that was talking about there's 160 different species of aliens that have interacted with humans since the 40s, that we have government records showing these interactions.
Right.
And there are some that eat us. There are some that use our material. There are some that experiment with us. There's different negotiations that go on with how much they can access us.
I'm not sure about the whole eating ones, though.
I have to say, I know, and I'm always like showing something to Brandon, and he's like, I don't know, Jesse. So you'll hear the more like, I can't believe this from me, and you'll hear the, I don't know, from Brandon, and which is great because then we can really question it. We can really look at those things and see it from these different perspectives. But go ahead, sorry.
Well, yeah, we need to do that.
We do.
Healthy skepticism is healthy.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm just excited.
Yeah.
I'm like, look at this. Brandon, look at this. I'm always sending him some link about something. Did you see that?
And I'm over here. I'm just like, I don't want to be eaten. I don't want to be eaten.
I am not tasty.
Right. I'm just going to tell you right now, I am not full of fruit flavor.
I'm toxic.
I'm just really curious to learn a lot more. There's been a lot of interesting conversations that have been coming up between the three of us. And the more that we look and get curious about the world around us, the more that there are just interesting books and interviews, and just this is going to be an ongoing conversation.
Yes, just like the nature of reality as we approach the end of our show.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to us talk about our experiences and our understandings and our excited research and learning.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and I'm positive there's going to be more on this.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm certain of is that we will continue to talk about this. So again, if you want to try and contact us, we are getting our emails all set up. It's TheCrystalCocoon @gmail.com. So we're getting ready to send out all of these wonderful podcasts. So if you're listening to this and you have a question about something, even if it's not related to this particular podcast, feel free to send us an email and get to know us, and we'll do what we can to respond and get back to you.
And if you are a contactee and you would like to share your story with us, we would love to hear it.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
If you have a cool experience that you're not sure about who you can tell because how it's going to be received, well, we'll receive it just fine. We'll be like, ooh, that's so cool. Can we talk to you?
And if you're in the Portland metropolitan area, Portland, Oregon, we're doing our first Meetup Energy Workshop this next Monday, the 17th, I believe.
17th, yeah.
Yes.
And a part of what we're going to be doing is trying to help people raise their vibrational expression so that they can have these kind of experiences also on their own.
we're going to be doing many things. The whole idea is to experiment with energy within a group and to see if we can raise the consciousness of the group as a whole, in addition to doing any kind of physical healing as a group, and really group-centered work is what it's about. But
We're all about the collective.
going in any
Community.
direction that we're guided to.
Yep.
Absolutely. So thank you again.